Okay, so thank you very much and welcome to this Corporate Scrutiny Advisory Committee meeting of the 3rd of October, held virtually. Apologies for absence.
Yes, Chairman. Apologies from Councillor Sue Barber and Councillor Kathy Pearce.
Do we need to approve the reasons or just accept that as that's live?
Just a note, really, Chairman.
Yeah, okay, that's sorted then. Minutes of the previous meeting of 20th of June. We confirm those correct record. Watching the nods around the room, everybody's nodding. That's a correct record, I'd say, and we can sign them at some stage in the future, I'm sure.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman.
Right, urgent business. I've not been told of anything urgent at all.
No, Chairman, there's no other urgent business.
No urgent business. Have we got any public speakers? I'm not aware of any.
No, I'm not afraid not.
No, enthusiasm is boundless, right? Okay, and declarations of interest. Who vaguely is in? Who's any got any declarations of interest they'd like to make at this stage, other than the ones that have normally been put forward by everybody? Literally nobody. That's sorted then. So we come on to the main feature of today's symposium. That's the plain pitch and built facilities strategy, and we've got with us, I think, Nick Tate here to talk us through that, and maybe has a presentation as well. So I'll hand straight over to Nick, I think.
Thank you, and I'm sure the attendance and lack of public is nothing to do with the subject matter, I hope. I'll put what I was intended to do was I think they were sent round earlier or towards the end of last week, but I will just run through some slides which sort of gives a bit more background of the three elements of the studies, and that will probably help with the discussion. They are a little bit wordy, so I sort of won't go through things line by line. If I share my screen first off to check that.
That's come through.
Okay. I'm just trying to make it go to. Come on. Right. Okay. And just as that, as sort of just a bit of overall context, updating the open space, the sport and recreation documents was highlighted in our local plan, which was adopted in 2019. Partly we were flagging up the fact that the evidence base and reports which policies in the local plan were based on were somewhat out of date. So it was identified as a necessary action through that process in any case. And obviously this subject matter a really critical role in terms of wider health and well-being. In particular, it has an increasing role in elements around wider sustainability and indeed sort of the climate change agenda. And of course, particularly with open space, there's big overlaps now with the ecological emergency and the sort of need to increase biodiversity. So they're very much studies which, yes, they're going to specifically support some planning related elements, but they have a much wider role as well going forward, and I'll touch on that as we go through the slides. So in no particular order, just a bit of an overview of the open space strategy first off, and this slide, bit, as I say, a little bit wordy, but just talk about its objectives, which was particularly, say, updating that baseline information so that we've got a clear view of all of our open spaces and the quality of those, and that was particularly important. Understanding it's not just the quantity, but also the quality of those spaces, and therefore using that to be able to start mapping where there were gaps or where there were requirements for improvements and additional provision. In particular as well, it's underlying evidence base to support our negotiations with developers when we're seeking to secure open space through the planning process. So again, really important. We haven't been challenged to date, but again, the longer the sort of longer your evidence base is out of date, the more the policies and the justification for seeking open space, either provision or contributions, is open to question through that process. And in terms of going forward, really important in terms of our evidence base overall, for when we move towards what will be a Somerset-wide local plan, the next local plan. So it's part of the evidence base for that process. And also importantly, it also provides an up-to-date sort of basis of which we can use for developing either strategies to invest and improve, or indeed to support funding bids. So, you know, a whole range of uses and objectives underlying the open space strategy. Just not going to dwell on it too much, but this slide just gives a bit of an indication of on the right hand side the methodology that was undertaken. So, and I would say and point out that stage 2 auditing local provision was a huge undertaking. We actually did that in-house. I had an officer, she's subsequently left, not as a result of having to do all this work, I hasten to add, but it did take, you know, probably the best part of a year, because she was, you know, had to visit every single one of our open spaces. There was a really detailed audit process to go through, and then writing that up and mapping it. So, you know, that was a very big part of the task. But by doing it in-house, that certainly made it was an, you know, more efficient use than just handing it over to consultants to do. So that sort of worked through that. Once you've got that audit revision, you can use that to help develop and set, as it says, the local standards. And we're probably now starting to move in, or we'll be moving into the sort of steps 4 and 5 in terms of starting to apply those local standards, and broadly they're similar to what we use at the moment. And that also will be used to, as I say, to underline future policy in the new local plan. And the other side of the slide just gives you a flavour of the sort of spaces, what we're talking about when we talk about open spaces. So those parks and gardens, just wider amenity green space, but it does include allotments, and also, as I say, the natural typologies for play space. If you're, for planners, we're used to the leaps, laps definition, but that just gives you an idea. They are different scales of play space generally. So a local area being quite a small area that's in easy accessibility to everyone, going right the way up to the bigger neighbourhood areas where you'd probably have a hard courts, kick around areas, basketball hoops, that sort of thing, and then up to Muga and skate parks. So it's a hierarchy of provision. Just a few, again, I mean, the documents are very large, very extensive, but some of the I suppose sort of key messages that started coming out of that quality assessment, and also we, as part of this process, we had a questionnaire survey, so we started to understand what individual people sort of felt about the quality of open spaces, and so I suppose the first one, not maybe a huge surprise, but the sort of parks and gardens, so the larger, more formal spaces actually had very positive scores. They are probably some of our best maintained areas, but as it says there, we don't have that many of those sort of large, more formal sort of spaces. It was interesting. Access was identified generally as a problem across sort of most of our informal spaces. So again, that's the sort of thing that you can help prioritize. You're thinking, okay, it's not just about the size of the space, but if people are finding it difficult to get there, you need to understand what those reasons are, and some of that may be to do with the, you know, even paths and the connections to wider residential areas. So it's not always about improving the spaces itself, it's the means of getting there. Again, I think it's important to note, in terms of the numbers, we didn't have huge numbers responding to some of these questionnaires, so you can get a few different answers. So you get sort of polar sort of examples. Some people thinking spaces are well looked after fair, some people thinking they're very poor. So as that third bullet point says, you sort of got both ends of the spectrum really, but clearly a concern in terms of natural and semi-natural states that sites that they needed more investment or better management to bring that quality rating up. Interesting around the education, because that's actually relatively a quick win in terms of going forward, but and the idea that there's a lack often of information about the importance of the space. We're talking primarily about the natural spaces here, but some interpretation. But again, that flags up something which could be addressed quite, relatively quite easily. Then it was interesting around some of the quality criteria around safety, and the need that certainly a lot of our spaces could be improved on that sense, and also, which is something which has got picked up on quite a few of the sites, particularly for example, for disabled children, the provision and the access is often not that is not really adequate. So again, this sort of assessment starts highlighting the areas where some intervention should be focused in due course. But I thought the last point was quite interesting, that open space generally noted to be reasonably well maintained, and actually in terms of this criteria, many of the sites were actually scoring as an excellent, and I think we should take that as positive, because that will reflect a lot of the maintenance that both we directly do as a council, but also the parish and town councils undertake. I'm probably not going to dwell too much on all of the sort of figures, but I think one of the big things was coming out is about the accessibility in terms of how far people are prepared to travel to spaces, and what that does in terms of when we come up with standards. What that starts identifying is that, for example, if people only are mostly willing to travel 5 to 15 minutes to reach an open space, then that information is used to convert into sort of standards of how many open spaces of different types need to be and where they should be located. So again, the children's play areas being the closest, you need to make sure you've got accessible spaces, that are within, sort of easy walking distance, which is why, and as I say, that information is directly used to convert the walk time into a meter figure. So we need to have a local equipped play area within sort of 400 meters, just a basic sort of open space, an equipped area within 100 meters, because that reflects people's, I suppose, sort of people's preferences as to how far they'd be willing to go for those. Not surprisingly, the sort of more equipped areas and the larger open spaces, that people are prepared to travel a little bit further. And again, interestingly, but perhaps no surprise, a significant number of people, over 50%, thought there weren't enough parks and gardens, etc. But again, the information allows us to unpack that into different geographical areas and understand where people feel there's a particular deficiency. So it's not going to be across the entire district, but there's going to be areas where there's clearly a lack of, or perceived to be a lack of provision close by. In terms of the standards, this is the last slide on the open space, but it's just it gives that information around the accessibility is converted into standards. Now we already have the right-hand column is what is in our existing local plan, and where there is an existing standard, as it happens, that has been confirmed through this work. So in terms of, for example, if we take at the bottom where it says local area for play, our current standard is 100 meters. This work has confirmed that through the evidence and the appraisal. What it does do in a few cases is introduced a suggested new standard. So allotments is one which jumps out. We don't currently our local plan has a policy supporting the provision of allotments, but what it didn't do is suggest what that provision should look like in terms of people's accessibility. This work is suggesting, allotments within 1.2 kilometres. You can unpack that a little bit more, because there is a difference between urban, shall we say, sort of the provision of allotments in some urban areas versus our rural areas. But that's where it develops the local plan. It provides a standard to sit beneath the local plan policy, which is why these documents being adopted as supplementary planning documents, that unpacks the local plan policy, and that has weight in planning decisions. And similarly, there's a new standard around, for example, the natural and semi-natural green space, less than 2 hectares, smaller areas of green space. They should be accessible within 250 metres, and it's unpacking those sort of additional standards, which also will have some crossover with things around, for example, potentially biodiversity, net gain, and some of our aspirations under the ecological emergency in terms of providing additional green space. Moving on to the built facilities strategy. So there's 3 arms of this. Built facilities. So this is the 2 aspects of the sports provision. So this is the primarily the indoor facilities, very similar to the open space in the sense of it's providing that underlying evidence base, really important in terms of the planning for sport and leisure, and as we say right at the top, that direct link to health and well-being. If there are good facilities accessible to all, then that's encouraging people to take up at whatever level and whatever role a whole range of sport and other activities. So that has those definite wider benefits for both physical and mental health. Again, very much starts off with an audit of what the existing quality and quantity is, and again, accessibility being very important in terms. If facilities are too far away, it certainly discourages people from taking up the opportunities that might be there. So you need to look at how accessible by both sort of walking, cycling, public transport. Very demanding, obviously, in a rural area such as we have in Sedgemoor. Important there that it says this isn't an actual sort of it doesn't come out with firm. This is what you should do, but it provides the evidence and the options in terms of where you potentially could invest in either improving existing or providing additional facilities. Very much built up with the detailed involvement of individual sports, so we understand what their requirements are and the types of facilities needed to support those sports. And as you see on the right-hand side, it does cover a whole myriad of different sports and activities. And it's interesting doing an assessment like this, because you actually start to learn about provision of sports which you didn't think were actually catered for in the area at all. So there's a huge range of opportunities, and again, some of this is about making sure that those opportunities are articulated, so people actually know that there is a facility close to them where they can take up indoor archery, for example, or table tennis is provided at these places. In terms of just the sort of big ticket recommendations that came out in terms of say not surprisingly, there's a strong emphasis on protecting our existing facilities. I don't think from the work that was done that any of our existing facilities were seen as being surplus to requirements. Certainly, if there was ever a proposal to close or change an existing facility, we would need very up-to-date evidence and a strong justification as to why that was the case, generally demonstrating that it was either there was no demand anymore because or that alternative provision was available. Strong emphasis, obviously, on enhancing the existing, what we have in terms of with quality, again, that accessibility, but also interesting sort of management as well, because some of this is about making better use of your existing facilities, and that can sometimes be around the way that facilities are either are run or managed. Perhaps encouraging and supporting with the help of Sport England, other sports to be able to use facilities which might originally have been bespokely built to support one particular sport, but going forward could actually find time within to provide facilities for different sports, and that sort of enhances their overall sort of viability in any case. And again, really important in terms of that management to try and ensure either formalise community access to facilities, and that's really important with things like school sites, where we always try, but it is quite challenging sometimes to get community access to school facilities. We understand the difficulties and sometimes around, in particular, around safety, and also making those facilities available outside of school hours, but clearly, you know, some of it, we have got some very good school facilities, which if you can ensure you've got community access, Northgate being a good example, where community access, you know, means their outdoor pitches are used, you know, sort of pretty much all during the week and outside of school hours. In terms of new facilities, again, it does provide evidence as to where new facilities might be required, and in terms of the new provision, does flag up that, you know, we don't as a district have that large sports hall complex. Obviously that is a major source of investment at the time of writing, and I think this is still, you know, it's still something being considered, but certainly the college were looking and had aspirations to develop quite a large, as it says, a 8-court hall. That is very much being undertaken by them, but the recommendation was clearly to support that, certainly that feasibility work going forward. Interesting in terms of additional provision, you know, netball was seen as one of those sports where there's certainly increasing demand, and this often reflects the success at a national level in terms of the sporting success and encouraging greater participation, and again around badminton courts as well, but again making, you know, where there's opportunities to refurbish courts and make better provision of what we have at the moment, rather than definitely being new provision. But yeah, netball was growing, certainly one of those growing areas. Tennis, again, you know, courts, some courts have been lost or fallen into, shall we say, sort of neglect and haven't been maintained for some time. So it does identify, where possible, reinstating existing courts, or at least investing to bring some of those back into more active use. And I think, whilst there were 2 courts, but I think the at Burnham, the proposal when the tennis courts have been transferred to the local trust is one of those courts effectively gets invested and will be brought back into active use. So that's very positive. Athletics is interesting. There's different ways of providing it. We're never going to have a full athletics court in Sedgemoor, but you can have. There's the picture on the right is a sort of you can have a mini athletics track. You can provide some track and field in slightly different ways. There are sort of innovation in this to encourage participation, because otherwise we're having to travel outside of Sedgemoor for certainly good quality athletics facilities. And again, as it flags up around the education, really important in terms of you know, providing facilities as part of education. And finally, the playing pitch strategy. So this is the other side of the coin. This is the outdoor element of it. So again, superseding the assessment we had in 2015. Very much it works within a Sport England methodology, and it has that focus on, shall we say, those key, more traditional sort of sporting activities. And in terms of how it was developed, there was a working group which had representatives from all of the national sporting bodies representing football, rugby, cricket and hockey, as well as Sports England. So and a full understanding of what their future requirements were, and also different and more innovative ways of delivering and encouraging people to take up these sports. So in terms of football, just a quick headline. It is interesting because it talks about there may be a need for an additional artificial pitch, maybe towards the end of the plan period. And one of the things that came out of this was you have to be very careful that you don't headlong rush into saying, well, we'll have a new artificial pitch, because if there isn't the demand for that, because the effect is that it may actually then mean that an existing pitch elsewhere has reduced bookings and isn't viable to keep in terms of going forward. And they are artificial pitches, absolutely they extend the use for sport, but they do take quite a lot of maintenance. So it's important that we don't just assume that more pitches is a good thing. We need to make sure that it's actually complementing and not taking away from existing provision. Hockey, I mean, given that this was done a couple of years ago, I mean, it's clearly flagging up the hockey pitches at Chiltern Trinity or do need investment. There may be these types of assessment will help 1610 if they were putting together a bid to try and replace those pitches. And again, important as well, some of the pitches in terms of clubs, they don't have a secure use, and that puts the club in jeopardy. So one of the big emphasis where possible, it's not necessarily for us to do, but it's to try and ensure that actual clubs are able, basically go to have a secure community use of that, because that enables the club to grow. If they have the certainty they actually have a pitch to be able to play on, then they can grow their club, encourage more participation, etc. Cricket is more about improving existing pitches because a number of them are rated quite poor. So and again, that will be challenging. That's about the investment in your, in ground staff and maintenance. But it does suggest there is a role for additional artificial pitches there, because that means that you can make more use. You don't necessarily need additional cricket pitches, but you can make more use of what you've got. And rugby, interesting, that is the one where there is a significant amount of overuse. We've been aware of that, certainly at Bridgewater and Albion, the need for additional pitches, either training pitches or junior pitches, because they're having to use their main pitch so much, and then its condition deteriorates. So that does actually identify by the end of 2032 the need for additional grass pitches to meet the projected demand in rugby. But what we do say there is, also looking at different surfaces which are coming in now. So even for rugby, you can get sort of different sort of these hybrid pitches which are suitable for different sports. So potentially a pitch which is suitable for football and rugby. Just last slide. Just in terms of other sports, they did look at a whole range of those other sports. Again, interesting, things like softball, American football are played in Sedgemoor, but no specific needs were identified for those types of uses. But as I say, those general comments was about retaining our existing pitches, and even sites which might or pitches which haven't been used for some time, certainly if possible to retain those, because they can be brought back into use to meet that future demand towards the end of the plan period. Again, that issue around pitches needing to show that there's a long-term demand for them, and wherever we're providing new pitches, and again certainly through schools if possible, securing that community use. So I mean, going forward, these documents, so they be adopted as supplementary planning guidance, so they will sit behind the planning policies, evidence-based going forward, and importantly, they also will support individual sports clubs or existing providers. It provides an up-to-date evidence base to support funding bids, particularly to things like the national bodies. So I can give a very sort of anecdotal example where I live at Puriton, that the sports centre at Puriton's been identified in this study for its as having a role for the wider Poldon area, and by being identified there, that is helping to support their bid for investment to improve the existing building. So it's really important because they can show that that investment aligns with the strategies that have been adopted for the area. So it's certainly going forward an important role in terms of that funding. So I shall stop sharing, I think, hopefully. And let's see, I'd happy to either take questions on what we've presented, or did you then want to sort of look specifically at the key lines of inquiries? But if there's any just sort of general questions on the overview, happy to try and answer them anyway.
And okay, thank you for that, Nick. That managed to condense 203 pages into half an hour. That was good. So let's look at now if there's any questions from members of the council. They can look at the key lines of inquiry that it has circulated, or they can pick up on the things that you've mentioned, or they may have other things they want to ask about. Of course, we've got 6 months life left in this council, so whatever we're doing really is a legacy project, and how it will transfer into the new arrangements after April. Anybody in the room like to ask a question of Nick? Councillor Finneran.
Yes, hi Nick. Just a couple of little points. There's some discrepancies in the background material for the report. It talks about squash courts in being available in Cheddar. There haven't been any squash courts in Cheddar for over 5 years now, and also they refer to King Alfred's School in Cheddar, my impression is that they're not mixing it up. They're not calling Kings in Cheddar King Alfred's. What they're doing is they're actually transposing the two schools.
Okay. That's really helpful. And as a proviso, and I put my hands up because I haven't done it yet, when they went to full council, they were approved subject to technical and drafting changes. So things like that we can pick up because we haven't yet put them on our website. So we can do that under the delegated approval. So they do need a careful final read through, but anything that certainly on a factual nature, if there's something in particular that jumps out and say that's just not the case because time's moved on, we'd take the opportunity to amend that. But bear in mind, then we'd always say it's a snapshot now of this date. So I'll certainly look at both of those.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Filmer.
Thank you. It was just a couple of questions really following on from the comment you made, Brian. The fact that we are heading towards unitary, Nick, where does this stand in terms of, you mentioned that we're introducing these new standards and some of them are our old standards, others are new. How do they compare with our other districts that we're going into? And on that basis, sort of with this new policy in place, how much weight does it have when it comes to the new unitary and actually getting the new council to take it on board?
I mean, in terms of going unitary, until the new Somerset-wide local plan is in place, planning decisions in what will then be the former Sedgemoor area will be made in accordance with the Sedgemoor local plan and any relevant supplementary planning documents or guidance. So in that sense, so I say nominally, because the timetable is to have a new local plan within 5 years. So that's probably broadly the length of time it will have in terms of us using it to determine our planning applications, accepting that the weight will start dropping off, probably year 3/4, as the new local plan emerges. In terms of our neighbours, whilst I don't specifically know what standards they operate on, but certainly the consultant support that we had worked on Somerset West and Taunton's existing, and is a local consultant who tends to specialise in this sort of area. So I would be assuming that we have a reasonable amount of overlap. Part of the work with going forward in terms of the evidence base for the new local plan will be looking at, ours is now very up to date, but looking at other areas and bringing that together, so we've got a comprehensive picture for the whole of the whole of the area. I think Somerset West and Taunton's it's probably about 3 years old. Theirs is reasonably up to date as well. I don't know about Mendip in South Somerset, but really our standards shouldn't be that different. Because
did you have a second question, Bob?
No, that's covered both of them. Thanks.
Okay, Councillor Finneran.
Yeah, sorry to come in on that. Just really following up on what Nick's just said. With regard to the evidence base for the plan going forward, is that going to be reviewed? I'm thinking particularly with regard to Cheddar. Part of the reason we're a Tier 1 settlement and we've taken proportionally the biggest growth in the district was because we had banks, building societies, commutable bus service. All those things have gone now. So we don't have bank, or as of the end of this year, we're not going to have any banks. We're not going to have building societies. They went a couple of years ago, and we've now lost our commutable bus service. And crucially, even with the proposed addition of another service, it leaves us disconnected from our primary hospital and medical facilities in Weston-super-Mare. So I was wondering whether whether it's going to be reviewed, because looking at the evidence that the evidence base that was used for the local plan when it was done, we wouldn't come anywhere near a Tier 1 settlement now.
Yeah, actually we're I'm supposed to try to be reasonably proactive on that. So it happens to be one of the planners in my team is currently, shall we say, bringing together particularly that role and function work from all 4 districts, and we've got a common assessment framework, so it's not entirely based on ours. It has elements of all 4 districts, but they weren't that different. But bringing that together, so as his first sort of task is basically combining it, so we've got a draft for the entire Somerset area, and then the next stage will be exactly that update to go out and say, right, we need to update therefore facilities, and that will probably be in terms of that next stage, that's almost certainly will be, we can do a certain amount ourselves, and then we would go out to parish and town councils with a questionnaire for survey. So we're trying to start that work because that's so essential for whatever we do. Obviously we're all working a little bit in the sort of dark, and there's a whole list of evidence base which sort of identifies who's got what and at what stage they are. So will be beneficial. This open space, etc., will be very up to date for us. We'll have other bits of evidence which are probably quite long in the tooth, and there'll need to be decisions about what's essential to update and what isn't, especially as the shopping list was quite big, and I think there was a fairly optimistic growth bid initially put in to produce a new local plan, which I think is having to be is being looked at further. Probably take a 0 or 2 off it. But it's an expensive business and it's a big geographical area. The importance, though, once those district boundaries sort of effectively disappear, is you know, if we look to part of our districts, places like Ashcott, Shapwick, etc., actually their relationship will be much more to sort of Street and Glastonbury and facilities there. So you do start looking at places a little bit, you know, also a little bit differently.
Yeah. No, thank you.
Okay, anybody else like to ask any questions at this point? No? Okay, Nick, are you happy with that response? Else for you to say then, right? Okay, so really what we're doing at the moment is going through some, reassessment of what we've got ready for going on to a better place or otherwise, a kind of a district council purgatory, and we'll be in this position until April, till it's all clear what's happening next, I guess. But we've explained how we've got to where we are, what we've got, have they been assessed with the community, and so on. So I think that's our job today, to note that the contents of the report. Really, I don't think there's anything else we can do other than that. So thank you very much for that, Nick, and we'll move on to the next item.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, the next item is the work programme. I'll try and stop that telephone ringing.
Yes, Chairman. The work programmes there in for members, just for information as to what's coming up for the next committee, and just to really see if there's any further suggestions from committee members for items for the work programme.
Yeah, well, we've got several more meetings now before we come to the end of life as we know it. We've got one in November. We've got the joint meeting, which normally looks at the budget in January. Not quite sure what they're looking at there, closing down accounts, I'm guessing. And then there's I think there's a March one after that, isn't there, as well? We've had items such as homelessness and the Property Investment Board. I noticed here from last time. I'm sure there was another list which members might like to throw in items to any of those meetings now. Anybody got anything burning they'd like to see burnt before the end of the session? No. So we'll get through November then with the items that we've mentioned, and we'll see if anything new comes up at that stage. So therefore, I suspect that's as much as we can do today. So thank you all for attending, and goodbye.